The JonBenét Ramsey case has been unsolved since the murder on Christmas Eve 1996. Who did it? It's a travesty that we still don't know. This is a true crime story that has captivated people for almost 30 years. John Ramsey, the father of JonBenét, at one point thought there was one person who could find the real killer and solve this case in an afternoon. And that person is our guest today. Hi, everybody. I'm Tom Zenner, host of Tom Zenner Scandal, co-host of One Degree of Scandalous with the one and only Kato Kaelin.
Star Smile Strong.
Welcome, everybody. Kato, you and I have been talking about bringing on a guest like this for a long time because the science is what captivates so many people, and so many crimes could be solved because of this. And so many people who are innocently in prison maybe could be exonerated because, and we are going to dig deep into it today with the one and only CeCe Moore.
I'll tell you, Tom, I researched CeCe Moore, and this is the one show where people are going to be screaming, more CeCe, because I'm doing a little dyslexic thing there. But honestly, it's amazing. And everything from the OJ trial that I was involved with all started sort of that whole thing on DNA. And when people hear what the lab that she works with, how DNA, just how it solves crimes, cold cases, makes innocent people, guilty people innocent. It is absolutely fascinating. I think I've told you before, back then when people were talking about DNA, when I left, that I thought that meant dude needs apartment. For me, I was, where do I live? DNA.
It's evolved, Kato. The science has come a long way since then. And you have a beautiful house now. It's everything has changed.
And then when OJ was living, of course, it meant dude needs alibi. But these are DNA things that CeCe Moore will be talking to us about. And like I said, fascinating life. I can't wait till we talk to CeCe.
We're going to bring her in from Orange County right now. And CeCe, thank you so much. There's no one more busy than you. You work around the clock. We know that. And you stay very busy. Very familiar face. People that watch the news channels on cable have seen you. Yeah. You've had your own shows, a big presence on digital media as well. The official title, investigative genetic genealogist and a media consultant. You do them both very, very well. Welcome to One Degree of Scandalous. And CeCe, let's just start it off right now. You probably, when you were going to USC, didn't see this path exactly. What was your first interest in this type of science and DNA? Did you study for it? And how did you end up at this level right now?
I didn't ever imagine that I would be working with law enforcement. That never even crossed my mind. I had an early interest in genetics, but it was 1987. It was my spring semester of my senior year. I had already committed to going to USC as a vocal performance major, and I was a musical theater person. So it, never occurred to me that I would end up in a career that is science adjacent. When I first was introduced to genetics in my AP bio class, I actually fell madly in love with it. I was 18, already had my plan laid out, and I loved it enough that I actually called USC, UCLA. I had full scholarships at both, and then schools all up and down the California coast looking for one that offered a genetics degree. And at that time, there just weren't any. There were no undergraduate genetic degrees available. So I was considering changing my entire course just from that very brief introduction. I was running around my high school saying, I want to be a population geneticist. And people were looking at me like I was insane. So I stuck with the original plan, but I kept that love of genetics throughout my life until it came back into my life much more recently.
You said it was 1987, and then I won't be doing all trial stuff, but 1994 sort of was the breakthrough for this DNA. So did Barry Scheck sort of become a hero for you?
Oh, that's an interesting question, since I've now worked really closely with Barry. I did watch every moment of the OJ trial. I remember being at the chiropractor when there was the low-speed chase. And I was, like so many other millions of people in the U.S., was just absolutely focused on that trial and what was happening. So that was really the first time that I watched DNA being used in a criminal trial.
Sure. And he's, like I said, I think he changed everything up because he was so intelligent and he just, he knew DNA better than the prosecutors because that was his field of perfection.
Well, Kato, you and I had that great topic a few episodes ago where we named the top 5 villains and the people that became stars from the OJ saga. And I had Barry Scheck number 1 as my number 1 villain. And CeCe, who works with him, might find this interesting because, CeCe, I thought, he came across so aggressively in the trial. And he's brilliant. He did a hell of a job. If he's your lawyer, you want him on your side. And nobody knew anything about DNA back then. So it's hard to refute what he was saying. But, man, he came across as a bulldog. Later on, he had also said that the LAPD had planted blood twice during the whole case. So do you think that do you know him well enough to think that maybe he thought OJ did do it and he did such a great job getting him off the hook? I wonder if there's any guilt associated with that. Have you guys ever discussed that?
No, we don't have that kind of relationship. I think he has used his skills and his experience to do such great work, though, that I actually haven't really even reflected back that far, because since then he's just done incredible work getting the innocent exonerated.
Yeah, how can you argue with that? Amazing.
And,
I mean, the first time I saw his name in my email inbox, though, I have to say I fangirled a little bit. I couldn't believe I was actually getting an email from the great Barry Scheck.
Yeah, and true crime is sort of my life. I watch all of it. I miss very, very few, and it's amazing how many shows he's on that everybody, because he's so respected. And you've been on, like I said, just Google CeCe Moore and see all the list of shows. You even had a show that you were on. It was called Finding Your Roots, and when I read that, I thought it was about my hair product. But finding my
that search is still going on, by the way.
Yeah, we don't know about my roots yet. But Finding Your Roots, it was LL Cool J. You found that his mother was adopted because of genealogy genetics, right?
Yes, I've actually been the DNA expert on Finding Your Roots for 11 years now. We were just nominated for an Emmy the very first time. I work with the wonderful Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., and he's just, an incredible person to work with. So I hope he wins that Emmy. But I did find that LL Cool J's mother was adopted. She had no idea. And it was a really big deal because LL Cool J had been partly raised by his grandparents, and he was extremely close to them. His father had shot his mother and grandfather and had gone to prison. And so his grandfather had really served as his father figure. And so to have to tell them that they weren't biologically related was obviously a huge deal. But
right. And then you capture all that emotion too, because it's so raw and real and unbelievable. 2 years ago, CeCe, you really sprung into public consciousness because of JonBenét. Mm-hmm. And John Ramsey literally said, that there's a very limited amount of DNA left and you can't waste it. Once it's gone, you can't get any more. And he wanted you involved in this. He knew enough about you where he specifically said he wanted you involved. And that was a media firestorm back then. And I'm anxious to talk to you a little bit about what's happened since then. But did that catch you off guard? Did you have a relationship with them? Were you interested in looking into that? Or did that just take off when John Ramsey, basically said CeCe Moore could solve this in an afternoon, essentially?
I didn't have a relationship with him. I'm so busy working hundreds of cases that I hadn't reached out to him. But when I was on the Today Show in 2018, when I was asked which case I would really like to work, I actually mentioned the JonBenét case. So I'm not sure if that came to his attention or not. But, he's worked very hard to try to convince the agency to use investigative genetic genealogy. And I think at that time, 2 years ago, I had helped with over 200 cases with successful identifications. So he had obviously, seen the track record that we have. At Parabon, my very small team has now helped law enforcement resolve over 325 cases, which is one per week on average since we started working with law enforcement 6 years ago.
It's mind-boggling.
So with the JonBenét, why would reading, the story about the JonBenét case, why would the police not want to release the clothing with the DNA? I just don't they want it solved? Am I correct? The police won't release the DNA on her clothing?
Now, I don't have any insider information since I have not been brought into the case, but that is also what I've heard. I think it's hard to know what's going on behind the scenes. And that's something I've really learned working with law enforcement. A person who previously had no law enforcement exposure or dealings, I've seen that oftentimes there's a lot of criticism that happens on these cases, but behind the scenes, the agency is working very hard and has very good reasons for what they do. So I'm not sure what they're really dealing with and what type of challenges they might be dealing with as far as that DNA. I mean, we know there's political challenges, of course, but if there's just a very tiny amount of DNA, if it's not enough to be able to perform investigative genetic genealogy, that could be the reason. We also know that they need to create a court admissible genetic profile, which takes a completely different processing lab. That would go to their crime lab. If they want to do investigative genetic genealogy, they have to send some of that DNA to a third party lab because none of the crime labs have that capability. And so if you have this tiny amount and you have to split it, that's very challenging. Yeah. And they need that traditional STR profile because that is what someone is arrested using. That is what is used in a court of law. Genetic genealogy is not used as evidence.
Right. Genetic, it's a little bit different. Kato, we had the episode maybe a year and a half ago with an author who wrote 2 books on the JonBenét case. Now, she was very anti-police force. And you know what? So am I. Now, you're a pop culture fan. You follow these cases. I'm sure you follow that one very closely. Kato, I have my theories on this too. I think there were so many mistakes at the get-go that so many people could be exposed for some bad police work, bad detective work. And it makes no sense. How is this thing not solved?
Well, this is Tom and I thinking alike. I was just going to say the exact same thing because we like playing detective. And I was going to say after you go on about your theory or whatever, with CeCe, it's hard not to play detective if you have a theory. But Tom, that episode, I was thinking the exact same thought, like, how is it not solved?
And plus they pinned it on the parents so early, or there was so much attention thinking maybe John did it. And then you had that weird ransom note. This story is one of the biggest mysteries that if you're alive right now that we've had in our life, just because of the media attention and how heinous it was. A 6-year-old girl, just disgusting. Everything about it just sickens me. But any red flags, anything stand out with you as far as like who made the biggest mistakes, where the blunders were, why this wasn't solved? Are we making this more complicated than it should be? I know DNA was way different back then, but if there's some left, if there's some traces, what could you do with that DNA if you got your hands on it?
Well, if there is enough viable DNA to perform investigative genetic genealogy, then we would absolutely be able to identify the contributor of that DNA. Now, they would have to determine whether that meant it was the killer or not, right? Because we all leave DNA behind everywhere we go. There may be DNA on her clothes that are not from the perpetrator. Maybe there are the people in the factory's DNA that created those clothes, that handled those clothes and packaged them. There could be people's DNA from, say, if the killer bought something at Lowe's or Home Depot, right? And so we don't know if that DNA necessarily would tie back to the suspect, but we would certainly want to try. It also would be dependent on the population group. So if it is DNA from, say, a factory in China, we wouldn't be able to identify the owner of that DNA, but we could definitely say that this isn't an individual from that part of the world. If it's a white guy, I mean, for lack of a better way of saying it, we'd be able to identify him probably in a matter of hours because the genetic genealogy databases that we have and the records that we have are heavily weighted toward being able to identify people with deep roots in the United States and primarily Northwest European ancestry. And so it really just depends what they have and if it is absolutely tied to that crime or if it could be DNA that was just left behind by somebody else incidentally.
So with DNA, can there still be more progress with DNA at the Parabon nanolabs? It's sort of like I'm thinking about Minority Report, the film, with Cruz. is there more that can actually be done with DNA? It's mind-boggling that you can find out these cases from 50 years ago, or even a mummy that was in the ground for thousands of years. Is there things that can still be done that we don't know about that DNA can do?
Well, Parabon actually pioneered using this type of DNA marker for law enforcement cases. So 10 years ago, they developed the ability to predict what someone looks like to a very high confidence degree. So their physical traits, their hair color, their eye color, their skin color, their shape, face. And I really thought that was science fiction. I mean, I started following their work early on because I was teaching about the future of genetic genealogy a lot at that time. And I just really was a doubter. I didn't think that it was possible, that we were far enough along to be able to do that. And I was talking a lot about being able to reconstruct how our ancestors looked from the DNA of their descendants. And that's how I first came across Parabon. But it's actually pretty amazing. I've been really won over during my work with them, because when I'm performing genetic genealogy on these cases, they've already created that snapshot phenotype, or at least the predictions before. And so I can then compare, when I identify that person through genetic genealogy, how consistent are these predictions they've made. And I'm blown away. And so I don't think most people realize how confident these predictions can be. It's not exactly what someone looks like. It's not going to be a photographic image, but we really can say in the vast majority of cases what someone's coloring is at the very least. And that eliminates a lot of people
Kato,
from suspect.
Sure, Kato, it's funny because you watch all these crime shows on TV and they make this seem so easy. We wrap it up in 40 minutes, right? Let's go to commercial, find the killer, on their high-tech gizmos, and it's done. So I think the public assumes this is easier than it is, and it clearly isn't. For you to get someone off the hook, CeCe, right? Because like even with the JonBenét case, if there's a little bit of DNA under a fingernail, we don't know where that came from or how long it had been there or what the source of it was, or on her clothing, pajamas, whatever it was. For you to get somebody exonerated and to solve a case, a cold case, does it almost have to be on a murder weapon, or what is the criteria where you can actually make the difference that you do and spring somebody from prison and find the real killer?
Well, so the optimal samples would be blood or any sort of bodily fluid, semen, saliva. But we've had a lot of success with both touch DNA. But when you use touch DNA, you have to be a lot more careful, right? Because it might not be tied to the crime. It's not as obviously from the perpetrator than it would be if it was blood or semen. But the other really amazing advancement is we can now use rootless hair. So for years and years, scientists said it was impossible to get DNA from rootless hair, from just the hair shaft. And this amazing scientist up at UC Santa Cruz proved everybody wrong. A few years ago, he successfully extracted the type of DNA we need for genetic genealogy, which is called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, from rootless hair. And so we've been able to solve a number of cases. I just had my 4th solve that came from rootless hair. And there are many, many cases out there where they don't have the typical type of DNA sample. And so they thought that their case couldn't be worked through the genetic angle. But thanks to Dr. Ed Green up at UC Santa Cruz, this is going to open up hundreds or thousands, probably tens of thousands of cold cases to be able to use DNA to identify that perpetrator just from a little piece of rootless hair. And so in JonBenét's case, we don't know what they have, but it's very possible there was some hair left behind on her clothing that could lead to the killer.
Wow, and bald serial killers are now going, whew, thank goodness. We got
what?
this going. Yeah.
It's funny because, or maybe not funny, but when a lot of these individuals are identified through investigative genetic genealogy and arrested, they're being found with articles sitting on their desk about genetic genealogy, or there are Google searches where they've been searching my name or investigative genetic genealogy. So I think there's a lot of violent criminals who've gotten away with this for years that are getting very, very nervous right now.
Let's hope so.
Oh yeah, like Tom, it's just amazing. Like what can happen in 20 years from now of what DNA can do, and it just Like, this is your field. It's just mind-boggling.
Kato, I don't think we're going to have serial offenders. That's the good news.
Yeah.
No reason for someone to become a serial killer because we can stop them after the first time instead of waiting until they victimized dozens of people.
Yeah,
It's sort of like a little bit like Minority Report, finding the killer that they can't kill again.
Right, and then you have the combination of what her field is able to do with DNA and genealogy, and then you have cameras everywhere, right? And you can ping a phone. So there, it's not like the mid '80s when Ramirez is running around LA wreaking havoc, killing 13 people in a few months, and terrorizing an entire city. You're right. That hopefully they're going out of business, serial killers. But you talk to Tom Lang like we do. I mean, there was a lot of them running around here and across the country, some that would kill up to 100 people or over 100 people. I mean, it's crazy. And you know what Tom Lang told me too, and we'll get him back just to talk about serial killers, is how many female serial killers there were. Believe it or not, there was a lot of them. Yeah. We'll get Tom Lang on. I'll give you a heads up when he's on because he is one fascinating individual. Okay, JonBenét, because I know our audience is captivated by that, and Kato is really dives in on the DNA and all this topic in general, and so I'm going to hit this JonBenét thing a little bit more. Everybody, because there's been so many blunders and mistakes and so many suspicious things that went on, all we can do is make assumptions and have our own theories because the police didn't do their job. Right. Period. It had to be weird for you, CeCe, because John Ramsey called you out specifically, and you said you didn't even know who he was, and he kind of put
never met him. Never met him.
But never met. That's what I meant. You had never met, but there's something weird about him too. I mean, when you consider the ransom note and the dollar amount that matched his bonus, his Christmas bonus, what are your thoughts? I know you didn't get actively involved in it, but do you have any theories about this?
Well, I think before I started working with law enforcement, I thought it was likely a family member. I don't want to name anyone because I don't want anyone mad at me, but I definitely was leaning in that direction. But as I've learned more about the case, I have really come around to thinking this was someone who came in through that window. And, I don't know if it was a stranger or somebody that they knew from events. But I think that she had drawn attention by some sicko, and that this very well may have been someone outside of the family. But without having insight to what is actually in those files, I am very hesitant to make any predictions anymore because since I now have had access to so many cold case files and seen that things were very different behind the scenes than I and the public thought, it has really opened my eyes and made me less quick to jump to any sort of conclusions on these cases.
Yeah, and I it's not even really a theory, but you read about the case, and we had the lady who was on our show with 2 books, and there's blunt force trauma to her head, and I always kept thinking, could it have been something where there? And this is opinion. I'm just not saying blaming anybody, but let's say there was an argument going on. And maybe one of them had this violent temper. Maybe there's liquor involved, and they swung a club or like a golf club or something, and accidentally missed the intended target, and there has to cover. I mean,
come on, that actually makes sense. I get where you're going, and you're not saying it happened that way, but that's a theory that kind of makes sense.
And you have to cover up something.
You got to figure it out quickly, right? And Christmas bonus. I mean, who knows, right? Hopefully, we will know someday. I mean, Patty's dead. John's still alive, married, I think, for the 3rd or 4th time, living in Michigan right now. But I can't even imagine.
Once again, that was not. I'm not putting blame for our show to make sure that there's just so many things that go wrong. You play detective. I do it. We've had so many guests with true crime, and who doesn't want to be Columbo and try to figure out these things that are going on. I mean, this is that's why I watch Columbo backwards. Before the crime.
Don't get me started on Columbo. I love Columbo. I love that show. People give me a lot of grief for it too.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah. And once again, that's also why. Yeah,
I've never seen it.
It's why true crime is big. What's that, CeCe?
I've never watched it. I guess I should.
Oh my gosh, it's the best release at night because you see the murder right off the top, right? You know who did it. It's all set up, and then he pieces it all together in his charming way, and then he nails the person at the end. DNA is just something that is fascinating. How much DNA does it take for you to work with? Is there a minimum amount? And can DNA be used more than once? Does it have a shelf life?
Now we only need just a few skin cells. So when I first started working with law enforcement, we needed much more DNA than we need now. It was still just a microscopic amount. But over the 6 years that we've been doing this, the amount of DNA needed for this type of processing has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And so that has also opened up a lot of new cases that just had a tiny amount. And that might mean that JonBenét's case is workable, whereas maybe it wasn't workable 3 years ago. So as we get better and better at this, and as the scientists are more focused on this type of SNP processing, which was never part of crime work before, it's now drawing so much attention that we see things are getting more advanced. And so maybe today her case isn't workable with genetic genealogy, but maybe it will be in 6 months. So we see these incredible technological advancements happening all the time, to the point where touch DNA is totally viable. If you just touch something when you're committing a crime, we can identify you.
So let me, for example, today I must have given about 5 high fives to people I didn't know, just saying hi to me, and going to a gas station and giving them money. I didn't do the credit card money. My hand touched another person. That's all? Doesn't that impede, that deter the whole what's going on? It's like, oh, look at all these skin cells we have. It almost makes it impossible, right? I mean, I have to have 15 at the very least of different person's skin cells on me, correct?
Right. So that is why when the sensitivity of our abilities have increased, you have to use more caution, because we have quite a few cases where we thought that we were trying to identify the killer, and it turned out it was someone else who left their DNA behind at a crime scene. Sometimes it's a former occupant of where that crime happened. Sometimes it is a criminal related, or let me say that again, a law enforcement person or someone working in the crime lab whose DNA was left behind. And so if it's, as I said before, if it's blood or semen, if there's semen inside a woman that was murdered and raped, right, that's very likely going to tie back to that killer. However, if it is just a few skin cells, you can't jump to conclusions, and you really have to have a lot more evidence tying that person to the crime. DNA right. is just not going to be the end all be all there.
You're off the hook, Kato.
No, there's a case that I saw on, I think it was a show called Fatal Vows or something, where the killer actually took a condom with someone else's sperm. And the police are so confused that the person wasn't there at the time. Anyways, they solved the case. But these are the criminal minds of how they would work to try to get the perfect crime. And I remember this episode just because you said with the semen of how the criminal probably Googles exactly what you're talking about, and Google you, and to find out, okay, CeCe Moore here says they can find this out. How can I prevent that from happening, right? Yeah, but it's a crazy mind.
It's a mismatch in brain power, though, because those people are committing crimes and trying to figure out on the fly, and then you got someone like CeCe 10 times or 1,000 times smarter, right? That hopefully can figure it out.
Not as smart as they're given credit for. So, I mean, look at Kohberger, for instance. That was not
I was just going to say that if you're going to get involved with that, because that'll be the biggest case coming up, and not for another year, I think, or two.
The trial starts next summer.
From Moscow, Idaho.
Why don't you crack that case before next summer? Get your hands on that DNA.
I actually did the investigative genetic genealogy on that case, but there appears to be lots of other evidence, fortunately, because that was touch DNA, right? And touch DNA is not quite as damning as other things because it is transferable, like Kato said. Somebody else could potentially, move that knife shaft into that crime scene. So it's good that it appears they have digital type of evidence as well, and other things that tie into that crime, because I wouldn't want to see somebody convicted of a crime just on a little bit of DNA evidence that doesn't necessarily and definitively place them there at that crime scene.
So you know for sure then that Kohberger there is evidence of him in that place.
Well, again, I don't have inside info, but from what I've read, which I've read a lot on it, it certainly sounds like there were other things. In fact, I don't even know for sure that investigative genetic genealogy identified him first, because there was a tip that came in from a security guard about his car. And so I think his name had already been added to that investigation, but I don't think they've probably focused on him until the genetic genealogy also pointed at him. But this is speculation. I'm not an insider, but that's kind of
No,
my
I know that. Yeah, the reason I say that is because that house that where the murders happened was the house that everybody partied at, and so you know that he might have been there and could have, the defense could say, well, he was at this party, where of course his DNA will be there. I mean, there's just so much
but
to
it
it.
was on the knife sheet that was under the body. So I think the only way that that could have been erroneously, tied to him was if somebody purposely had him touch that and then transported it to the crime scene. And that is why you have to be really careful about touch DNA. You really need additional evidence and other reasons that you are arresting someone and trying someone for a crime.
In Parabon, when the nanolabs get when law enforcement or anybody calls, do you ever work pro bono?
I definitely have worked pro bono, yes. I mean, Parabon's a business, and they're a small business, and it's really hard to make any money working with law enforcement, and particularly with genetic genealogy, because there isn't much funding for it. So, they'd rather I don't do a lot of pro bono work, but my entire career previously was pro bono. I helped many thousands of people find their biological parents, adoptees, donor conceived, people who took a DNA test and discovered dad wasn't who they thought. I never once charged anyone for that in all the years that I did that work. So I'm very much a person who believes in public service, doing the right thing, and using my time for good and to help people. And so I have
told
done
you.
that.
More of CeCe.
Yeah.
More of CeCe right there.
The Kohberger case has deep.
Oh, let me just say also, I was never an employee before, though. I was always my own time, my own money that I was offering. So I have to be a little bit more careful with that. But I have done some criminal casework pro bono, and I always go over the hours. My billable hours are 15, and I've really worked 50. So yeah.
You'd be a horrible lawyer, CeCe.
I know.
Horrible. You don't.
You wouldn't be billing everybody.
Yeah, but what you uncover valuable information that people will pay a price for. So there could be. It's very, very admirable that you do that for free for a lot of people. There's some things about the Kohberger case, the Idaho murders, that make me a little nervous. When it's committed in a small town, they just don't have the resources, these investigators, and I worry that they make mistakes early, then they got to cover their butts. I'm not saying that's happening.
I think in that case, the FBI got involved really early, and they have almost unlimited resources. So I don't think that's a big problem in that case, at least from what I've seen so far. The FBI...
And the house is torn down.
What were you going to say?
And the house is also torn down, which they said they don't need it anymore, but that's bizarre, I think, in itself.
I'm sure the FBI will have to figure out which way Kohberger votes before they, they make everything political these days. I tell my kids all the time this, Kato, life isn't a vending machine, because if you grow up now, things are so easy. You want food, you make a call.
Yeah.
It's unrealistic. You need a ride, Uber. It's amazing. We live in an amazing world right now, but there are people that have to do that work right behind the scenes, and there's so much more that goes into it. And I think people look at DNA as magic. Hocus pocus. And then somebody like CeCe just comes in and saves the day and solves it. For you to make these identifications of whether it's a suspect, of, a family member that somebody's trying to search for, what kind of database do you have to work with? Like, it's not like a piece of hair is just going to spit out a name. So how do you tie that to who it is? Well, if I'm working with someone of unknown parentage, then I can compare against about 50 million profiles in the big databases like Ancestry.com, 23andMe, MyHeritage. But if I'm working a law enforcement case, I'm actually limited to the two smallest databases, which are Family Tree DNA and GEDmatch, because the others have barred law enforcement from using their databases. So it's much more difficult for me to identify a violent criminal or a Jane and John Doe than it is to identify someone's birth family. So that's unfortunate, but it's still doable. But in GEDmatch, we only have about 1.8 million
profiles, and we can only compare against the ones that have opted into law enforcement matching for these violent criminals. So that's about a third of that database. And then family tree DNA, it's about 1.5 million or so. And so it's really a small percentage of the number of people who have taken these direct-to-consumer DNA tests.
Yeah, I did 23andMe. I'm 95% American, 5% golden retriever. I'm a little worried about that. No, I'm getting so.
Well,
Go ahead,
we have a primary suspect for a lot of dog bites in the area, I think, right here. See some teeth marks, Kato.
Yes, a dog catcher's after me now. And catch me at what? CeCe, what is your most proud moment, maybe a reaction you got as someone out of jail or anything? For you, what is the one thing that you did that your karma, it's the best feeling in the world? What is it? And maybe there's more than one, but what is it for you?
It's helping to exonerate Christopher Tapp in the Angie Dodge murder and rape case out of Idaho Falls, Idaho. He had served 20 years behind bars wrongly for her rape and murder. And I helped to identify the actual killer rapist, Brian Drips. And that then in turn helped to exonerate Christopher finally. So it's one thing to help find violent criminals. That is very satisfying and meaningful. But to help clear the name of someone who had been wrongly convicted is just the greatest feeling I can imagine. It's definitely the highlight of my career.
Well, real quick, how did that process happen? Because he had to go through appeals while he's in prison. And so I think it's called, I don't know what project, something that, I can't think of the name now.
Barry Scheck, going back to Barry, did the Innocence Project. And,
Innocence Project, thank you.
I actually worked with Idaho Falls Police Department on that case, but the Innocence Project was already representing Christopher, so they were involved as well. But in some cases, it's the Innocence Project themselves that hires me. But in this case, it was the local police department that wanted to find answers.
And that involved him writing letters in prison and someone saying, we're going to take this case. Actually Angie
Dodge's mother. She originally thought he was guilty and actually wanted him to get the death penalty. But then she watched his confession tapes. It was like 48 hours of him being questioned. And she realized that he'd been fed all of the information and that he couldn't possibly have been the real killer. So she started advocating to get him exonerated, which was just incredible as the mother of the victim.
That's a great.
Yeah.
I know why that's your most proud moment too. That's fantastic.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because the work you do literally just changes lives. Paths are instantly diverted. Maybe somebody is freed, and maybe somebody that thought they got away with something is going to prison, which hopefully happens a lot. Is there any instances where you felt unsafe? Because you are finding someone that thought they got away with it. Have you ever been threatened? Is there ever anything like that? Because these are unstable individuals capable of violence. Does anything like that exist in your industry?
Well, I've been advised not to talk about this subject to draw more attention to myself. I'll just say I've gotten letters from serial killers that are behind bars. And as long as people are behind bars, as long as the people I've helped identify are behind bars, I feel safe. If someone were to get off on a technicality, that probably wouldn't be great for me. But I guess the concern is that if I'm drawing attention from those behind bars, could I be drawing attention from those not yet behind bars? So yes, I do. I got an Akita, who is the most amazing guard dog. I've never felt so safe in all my life. I've never had a dog before. And I lucked out with this amazing dog that would protect me, at all costs. So I feel very good about it now. I also keep my home residence very, very private. I've had detectives call me up and say, get a gun and learn how to use it. I know where you live.
Get a post box.
They do too. But I have protected my address for many years. When I was a model, I actually had stalkers. And so I started protecting my address way back, which put me in a really good position now, because most of the genetic genealogists I work with own homes in their own names. And that is why my team has never wanted to go public. I've always been the face of all of our cases. And some people think that's because I just want the attention. It's not at all. I've begged my team to go public and do interviews, but they are very concerned. And they just don't have the history I have of starting to protect my privacy very early on.
I thought Tom was going to ask you if your Akita's name was Kato.
You know, the most famous Akita ever
Close.
was named Kato. It was Nicole's dog.
Yeah.
Oh, she had an Akita?
Yeah, that was the plaintive whale.
Yeah.
It got the cover of People magazine when Kato the dog died.
And the footprints, or the paw prints, excuse me.
I knew that back then, I guess, but I had forgotten that. Yeah, our dog
Well, you
is
got
named-
the great watchdog. You got the best watchdog.
What are they known for?
It was in Chinese royalty. The Akita was the dog with the chow. Yep,
It was
that the emperors always kept.
They're known
What's its
for
name, CeCe? What'd you name him?
Kita. It's a girl. And she's my girl.
Kita's her name? Kita
Yeah.
Kita.
Kita. But they
Kita's
were
like Kato.
protected Japanese royalty, not Chinese.
Ooh, Japanese
and
royalty.
they're known for bear hunting. I mean, these are tough dogs. She's 80 pounds of pure muscle, and she's incredible. Akitas supposedly don't bark unless something's really important, but my dog thinks a lot of things are threatening and important. So she's a little bit more vocal than the typical Akita.
Oh, that's great.
Can I rent Kita next time I go to Aspen? Watch 3 episodes ago. I had a story of how when I was in Aspen, I was almost attacked by a bear. You know what? People gave me some grief about that, Kato.
Yeah,
I wasn't protecting Shonda. I think I was protecting Shonda, but I'm
Yes.
not going to go fight a bear. You know, but that was quite the story.
Because the bears look friendly, but they're not. The bears care about food.
Hey, any animal scares the crap out of me. Number one, all dogs are generally aggressive towards me, except our dog. You've got to come meet our guy, Spike.
Yeah.
I had two rules in the house. Here's a funny story. So, my wife and I have been married 21 years, and really 3 rules. Okay, number 1, no gum chewing. I'm that guy that I hate that sound, and there's a diagnosis for that, Kato. I'm not just nuts. Like if I'm in church or someone's chomping on gum, we're moving. We're moving. I don't care how obnoxious it is. At a movie, I never go to movies anymore, but I can't stand that sound, right? Maybe you've heard of the CeCe. So that's one rule. Yeah, it's legit. My friend Dr. Alessi told me that is legit, so I'm buying it. The other rule was no
you
pets.
like me because I don't ever chew gum, so we go.
Yeah, but he hates the Wrigley family.
And I just didn't think that I would. I thought we were not the family because we're busy. The kids are in sports and blah, 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 blah. So now we have a dog who's the greatest dog ever. His name is Spike, the most lovable kind. He's like a terrier thing that we rescued him from the mean streets of San Bernardino. And this guy and Christine, our good friend Kyle,
Yeah.
Kyle's fiance, Christine,
Yes.
she runs an amazing business in Manhattan Beach rescuing dogs. And I was going to Vegas for the weekend and she said, Tom's gone. You're going to watch this dog for the weekend, and then it became part of the family. And then the third thing was
What's the name for a rescue, by the way?
I'll get it for you. I will get it for you. It'll be in the description of this and I will tell you, but she does such an amazing work. Oh my God. She saves so many dogs. You go to her house, you'll have between 4 and 5 there. And she's so good at identifying people that she should pair. Do you need a dog?
Yeah, no, but I know she runs a charity for it.
Yeah, Christine, be careful next time. You might leave with a dog.
No dog.
It's like a party gift. The third rule was, because Boston basically ran me out of town when I was a sports anchor there. I said, we're not going to Boston. Boston's off the table. We're not going there. Now my daughter goes to Boston College and it's my favorite city. I love Boston and I know I was the problem. There was something wrong with me.
You'd hate my dog. It chews gum.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
CeCe,
I've never been a gun person, but my husband bought a gun. And so we actually have a gun in the house as well. So any of you violent criminals watching this, we are prepared for you.
Yeah, and I have a
I
burner.
like
I'll
that.
come
I
down and
like
protect
that.
you too. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'm not taking any crap. CeCe, the OJ case, you were fascinated by it. You're talking to the man who had a big role in the trial and is a lifetime of stories and memories from it. Any takeaways? Anything that you look back now with your experience and your knowledge and the research you've done and just seeing the advancements in everything in criminology? Anything stand out for you that would never happen again? Or if a similar scenario were to unfold right now, do you think OJ would have been in prison?
Absolutely. Because now juries understand DNA. It's now accepted. At that time, it was still quite new in the use of law enforcement. And it's amazing that they actually had the DNA match and he was exonerated. So that wouldn't happen now because all of these true crime enthusiasts and all the people that have watched the CSI type shows and just being educated over the decades of how solid those DNA matches are. I don't think anyone could ever get off with those same circumstances now, even with the great team, the legal team that he had behind
Well,
him. I think it would be
yeah.
useless.
Having said that, though, that's how good Barry Scheck was, because it said
just
it
gonna
was
say, Barry Scheck.
it was like 3 billion that it was OJ, and the way he convinced the jury that it's not him, like
and John
play the
Cochran.
lotto.
I mean,
It was just like he knew how to speak to the jury about this, and I the DNA evidence came out. I was sequestered, so I didn't know anything until kind of after. I was like, it was just a slam dunk, I thought, for the prosecution, but
yeah,
you know,
I watched
different.
that recent show about Nicole because I really wanted to honor that, focus on the victim. That's the other thing
Yeah, it's
too.
terrific. It's on Lifetime. It was a incredible story.
Kato
about
was
her.
in it.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's
incredible
where
person.
I heard about your podcast. Was it mentioned in that?
It probably was.
I remember because when
because
Tom
I don't know.
I already knew about it, so I was trying to remember where it was. Maybe it was there, or maybe I read something related to that mentioned your podcast.
That's true. And we know that Dr. Phil loves the show, which is a great promo for us.
Oh,
He's a
really?
big fan.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
hi, Dr. Phil. I love that.
He's launched his new network in Dallas. Kato was on one of his first episodes when he relaunched earlier this spring.
Right.
I've
CeCe.
done a couple with him, but not since he started his new project.
Sure. And I've seen you on Dr. Oz, and you're everywhere. You're everywhere.
Yeah,
You're
Dr.
great.
Oz
You're
works
great on camera.
I missed that. Dr. Oz actually treated me incredibly well, and he was always willing to cover cases that I brought to him. A lot of these cases don't get the media that they deserve. So I was always telling him about different cases, and he was very willing to educate the public about the databases. So I do miss him. I know people say a lot of negative things about him, but he was really great for investigative genetic genealogy.
I get the feeling that, honestly, for some I don't know what's going to happen this year or not. I have a feeling that, CeCe, you're going to get involved with the Boulder police for the JonBenét Ramsey. I really do. I just feel like
I don't think so. I mean, I've been emailed tens of thousands of times probably over the years by just the public asking me to work the case. Sometimes the Boulder police are looped in on that. And I think they're really tired of having my name come up. I think they probably would not
I also
want to.
think it's such a long time ago. Most of those people are gone, and cold cases, are reopened. And I just think that when
You're
certain
right.
things
There's
are
a lot of
reopened, they
You're right. Even in my own case.
and that's why I think it's just like they're going to say, let's contact this person. So,
Well,
it's just my opinion. I'm usually right with my gut feelings. We'll see.
I
It plays
know
out.
that they put a task force together, a committee to go over the evidence again and try to determine if they could use investigative genetic genealogy. But the proceedings are of course confidential, but I actually have a friend on that committee. So fingers crossed that it goes to someone very skilled, very experienced. It doesn't have to be me, but whoever does end up with that DNA evidence is going to have to use extreme caution, because sometimes DNA is processed like that and then it's gone. So you asked me earlier, can you reuse it? When it is consumed, it is consumed. So if you have only one last remaining tiny sample and they sent it to the wrong lab, to the wrong group, that could be the end of it. There's another case that I am close to the family with, that it was supposed to come to Parabon, and at the last minute it was sent somewhere else. And that lab didn't know how to work with mixtures. So in sexual assaults, you're often dealing with mixtures, right? Because the bodily fluids mix. And so Parabon is the most skilled, not me, but our scientists, at working with those mixtures, subtracting out the victim's DNA, and then letting us just focus on that suspect's DNA. And that didn't happen in that case. And apparently it was the last bit of DNA evidence. So it'll likely never be solved. So I think that could also be why Boulder police are being so careful about this. Probably if they do even have anything, it's so tiny, they want to wait until there's high confidence that it will be successful in that process.
Then let's hope they can find it. Yeah. Yeah, there's very little left. I think there was a trace in her underwear and maybe something that was under the fingernails. I think that's really very little that's left in that one. I'll ask you both this because I don't know the answer. But DNA is so definitive. right? Do you guys know the legal process? For instance, in the OJ situation, if there was definitive proof, the OJ DNA matched, and they could convict him and it was obvious. But then when the jury is so biased for whatever reason and they refuse to convict him, does the judge have the ability to just call it a mistrial then? Is DNA considered that definitive that if it's that obvious and they go against that evidence, is it thrown out, or do they have to just go by what the jury says even if they have biases?
That's a great question. I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know, but it seems to me that I've seen judges set aside verdicts. But, double jeopardy can attach. And so that's why OJ, of course, could never have been tried again later. I'm sure later he would have been convicted, but they couldn't retry him. So I don't know the answer to that. Do you know, Kato?
Yeah. I don't, but I would think it's in the hands of the juror. And the jurors make the decision.
I guess, right? That's what our judicial system is based on.
It's their vote, and that's the final. So I don't know if that's right or not, but I think that's how it normally plays out.
I think one fascinating thing about your bio, CeCe, is you have your SAG card and have had it for a while. You got any roles out there for you? Any movies coming up? Any projects?
Oh, no. Gosh, I was so happy to put that behind. In my mid-30s, I went behind the camera. I was super happy there. I never had any intention on being in front of the camera again. When you're in your 20s, it's great being on camera. When you're in your 50s, you do not necessarily want to be on camera. So it was never my intention to become an on-camera talent again. I'm really lucky I had the training I had to be able to be in a position then to educate the public and to advocate for investigative genetic genealogy and for the victims and their families. But it was never the plan. But you mentioned a TV show. I don't know if you realize, I actually had a short-lived series on ABC. It was called The Genetic Detective. It was 6 episodes, and it followed me and my work. And again, I actually didn't want to do it, but ABC really was enthusiastic about it, and it was a great opportunity to promote genetic genealogy and get support from the public. So that is still on streaming on abc.com. I don't know why they don't have it on Hulu anymore. But yeah, if people want to see more about how this is done and learn about the victims and their families and the amazing detectives I worked with, then they should go check that out on ABC.
I know Tom and I are glad you joined us on camera.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you get a lot of camera time as the expert that you are. Do you ever get brought into trials as an expert witness?
No, I'm 55 years old. Like, for a woman, it's not that much fun being on camera.
But you don't look it. You're good on camera.
Oh, well, thanks. I just lost a lot of weight. So it's like sometimes you have to choose between your face and your body. And I feel like my face fell a little bit with all that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, do you do any consulting for jury or in trials? Are you brought in by either the defense or the prosecution for your expertise?
I've had 72 convictions in my cases where I helped identify violent criminals, and I've been on hold to testify for the prosecution on dozens and dozens of those. But I'm glad you brought this up. The reason I haven't had to testify in open trial, other than grand jury hearings and pretrial hearings, is because genetic genealogy is not exculpatory. It is not used to charge anyone or convict anyone of a crime. It is simply a lead generator. It's a highly scientific tip, but law enforcement has to treat it the same way they would if I called that name into Crime Stoppers. They have to do their full investigation, they have to do their due diligence, and they have to ultimately collect DNA from that individual and get that one-to-one match to that STR profile, that CODIS profile that is is used to charge someone with a crime and eventually convict them of a crime in court. So for that reason, we've been able to help set a precedent across the country. In all of these cases, judges so far have ruled I didn't need to testify because it is a tip. It's not being used against the suspect in the court of law. Now, the Kohberger trial could change that, though, because it's a death penalty case, and the judge has been more lenient for that reason. Judge has allowed a lot more leeway as far as allowing the defense to see more of the genetic genealogy process, and we try to protect the matches. You don't want, a serial killer to know that their second cousin helped to identify them, right? And so we really protect the identities of those matches. And we hope that that continues, because it could really have a chilling effect on what we do if people knew their names were going to come out publicly.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of watching any of the crime shows is when they go into the CODIS, the machine, they look for matches of the thing. And I don't know how fast that takes, because there's over 100, 200 million, possible. They trying to find a match. And when they find the match, they always show them so excited, we've got a hit. And then they show the detectives going, we've got a hit on this person. Yeah. Wow.
And that is an exact match. There's also something called familial DNA. California allows it. Some states do, some don't, where you can look for a first degree relative. So if that person's parent, child, or full sibling has been arrested and had their DNA taken, then they can identify you through that. And there has been some very high profile cases in California that used that. Other states have banned it in some cases. And so that's kind of the in-between between the CODIS database exact matches and what I do. And they can only find those very close relatives because they only use 20 genetic markers, and they use those STRs. Now, we have this expanded power because we look at about 700,000 markers across the genome, and that's how we can find distant relatives. And those distant relatives then allow me to reverse engineer the family tree and eventually the identity of the person who left their DNA behind at that crime scene.
This is my last question, and it's not true crime, but it is with the nanolabs. And can you, at the labs, can they now get a person's DNA from family members, and can they start curing possibly diabetes? Can they start curing maybe blindness? Can DNA, it's sort of the back to the first questions that I asked you, what'll happen in 20 years with DNA? Can they start solving things? Obesity, anything that's an ailment, cancer,
So that's
DNA
actually a great question, because that's what led to the advancements that allow us to do what we're doing now with genetic genealogy. There are companies, one in particular named Illumina, which is down here in Southern California, that created these chips, these SNP chips for GWAS studies, which is genome-wide association studies, that is to do exactly what you're talking about.
Wow.
And that chip is what's used for all of these tests, for ancestry DNA tests, for 23andMe. And 23andMe was the ones that offered this initially. So scientists told us we could not use SNP profiles and autosomal DNA, which is the type of DNA we're using now, for genetic genealogy. They told us it was impossible. But 23andMe started offering these tests for health purposes, for exactly what you're talking about. And some of us genetic genealogists then started using their tests to see, can we compare against each other and see if we share DNA? How much does the second cousin share? I tested about 40 of my family members at the beginning to do exactly that. And so citizen scientists used the work that Illumina and 23andMe was doing to create what we have now. We created this incredibly powerful tool for human identification out of volunteerism. Nobody was making money. There was no such thing as a professional genetic genealogist then. We all did it with volunteer hours, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of collective volunteer hours. So we built this on that. So yes, it's absolutely possible, and it will happen increasingly in the future, that we'll be able to pinpoint which genes are responsible for which diseases. They're already doing that. And then with CRISPR and the advancements there, they'll start being able to adjust people's DNA in order to avoid someone being born with that, or to potentially cure things later. And so there's so much promise for the health side of genetics. It's not my area of expertise, but it's overlapped a lot with my work. I've seen so many great stories from people who have had health benefits because of these direct-to-consumer DNA tests.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, you're in an industry and a science that changes every year. We have you on a year from now. I'm sure there'll be some even further advancements that are changing the world. So congrats on all the great work you do.
CeCe.
Before you go, Kato and I, we're married. So that means as husbands, we get in trouble a lot. We get blamed for a lot of things. Can we keep you on speed dial so you can get us off the hook? for some trivial things. Are you getting in trouble? I get in trouble a lot.
I'm always in trouble.
Always in trouble. CeCe, we may need you down the road to prove our innocence. And I have a question for Kato and you, CeCe, a little bit lighter.
Can I talk about real quick for your question? Is the thing that, and I can finally, it's sort of like DNA, I can finally tell, but just by looking at my wife's hands when she's mad at me. For instance, if she's holding a gun, no, I'm kidding, CeCe.
A baseball bat, whatever else might be available.
No, what are you going to say? I'm sorry.
So, Kato, you do love true crime. I mean, these sort of DNA shows on TV. Like, do you watch them with Shang-Yi? Will you guys watch them together?
Yes.
Even at the end of the night, because sometimes they're a little dark. Criminal Minds and shows like that.
I don't like that she's taking notes during Forensic Files.
How about you, CeCe? What's your go-to show at night when you need to unwind after dealing with all this stuff that you do? I mean, this is some stressful work that you do and with big consequences. So what do you like to watch late at night when you're shutting it down?
There's a lot of great shows on Netflix that my husband and I will finally sit down and watch late at night. But something really interesting has happened that was unexpected for me is when we are watching a fictionalized version of crime, sometimes I can't watch it anymore. Sometimes, especially if it's like a horror flick where a woman is driving late at night and some guy's trying to force her off the road and kidnap her and hold her. And those are very difficult for me because it's so real now. I know so many women that have gone through these horrible things, and it's not fun for me anymore, and so it has really changed me in that regard. I think I have the perfect type of personality or I don't know, better way to say it, but I am made for this work. I think many people doing this would get really dragged down by it and depressed and things. And I was born my mom says, with a sunny disposition and don't tend to have those issues. And so I've been able to work these cases and still stay, pretty buoyant and pretty happy most of the time. But it has changed my entertainment, what I want to watch for fun, because I just know too many really awful stories to enjoy those things anymore.
I always say to my wife Shang-Yi, I always say to her, I said, always be aware of your surroundings at the store, who's driving behind you, because the new thing now is someone if he follows you out of a gas station late at night, they'll purposely, if you're on a street that there's no traffic, they'll hit your car lightly because your first thing is to go out and check. Yeah. And then that's been like 3 or 4 cases. That's like a new thing going on where they take you and abduct you and either rape or kill you. So anyways, we should leave on a good note.
Guys, so uplifting.
Hey, have a great drive wherever you're going
thanks,
up
Kato,
north.
after I just dropped my daughter off in Boston. But luckily no car. Luckily no car there.
I know.
Hey, good luck.
I was thinking, I was glad I didn't, as I've been doing this work, I was relieved I don't have a daughter for that reason. But even having a son, being a parent, it's so scary knowing what can happen. And so I'm probably way too overprotective, even of my son. So he's had sort of the disadvantage of me doing this work and becoming so familiar with all of the really terrible sides of people. Sure, but like I was saying, I think my sunny disposition has been a little dampened, but I've been able to keep going with this. And so I'm really fortunate that I just happened into this job. I'm very
keep it going. Keep doing great work. Good luck moving your son into college.
Thank you.
Be prepared. It's a little emotional. I just did it.
Yeah.
I knew it was going to be tough, but especially, a Southern Cal girl going all the way to the East Coast. So it was tough, but at least I'm sure you're going to find solace in knowing that he's at the right spot. And that's the most important thing. He's going to thrive there, find a great home, find his new circle of friends. And the kids at that age are ready for it. I think they're ready for that freedom and taking that next step. Yeah.
My son chose his college for tennis. He's a tennis player. He wanted to play on the tennis team. He actually took a gap year because 2 of his seasons were canceled because of COVID when he was in high school. Mm-hmm. So he's been playing tennis every day for the last year. So I've been fortunate he's been here. He hasn't even had to go to school. So it's going to be even harder in a sense to have him gone.
Right. And my daughter's going to run track at Boston College. So I totally get it. And you want to feel comfortable with the coaches. So enough of that. I'm back. I was gone for 6 days moving her in, but I'm back. And it was a great trip.
6 days, Monday to Sunday of next week. So I'm glad we got in now. And I'm sorry I was hard to get a hold of. But once you got me, full focus.
I think she was suspicious of me. She doesn't like giving her number out. I don't blame you. Hey, CeCe, great having you on the show today. Seriously,
Honestly,
thank you so much.
you
We'd
so
love to
much.
have you again down the road, and keep up the great work and safe travels to the upper Northwest, okay?
Nice to see you all. Thanks for having me today.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Oh,
Yeah,
Tom, that was great with CeCe.
Yeah, great show, very informative. Looking forward to a lot of comments on this too, because people are fascinated by this.
Yeah.
They're like you, Kato, and me to some degree, but you're really into it, and why not? I mean, it affected your life in such a big way.
And I watch it because I'm always aware of these clues of how people, how they would think of, just like timelines. But we got to cover the JonBenét and the Brian Kohberger case, which we're going to really get into when it starts happening. And I mean, we have CeCe Moore on, who, possibly will be part of that case.
Be great. We'll follow
You
that.
never know.
And then we go back and watch last week, Paul Baresi.
Oh, yeah.
The Hollywood Fixer. That was a good episode too. And we've got almost 80 episodes in our inventory now. So I tell you every week, make sure you also listen to our audio podcast. If you're doing a road trip, if you're bopping around, if you got to commute to work, but make us part of your rotation. You're going to enjoy it. You're always going to pick something up. Maybe you did on the telecast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and our new host Spreaker, doing a great job getting our podcast out there. It's fantastic. So make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, whether it's Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get that. And love to get your comments. Any thoughts on future guests? We have some really, really exciting shows coming up. Follow the K Train on social media. You can follow me. We'll keep you updated on everything that's going on.
Yeah, that's great. You said that. And also, I just got on X, Twitter, someone just said, Tom and Kato, I love your show. Can you do something on Vince McMahon something? I don't know. It's on my
Kato. It's huge. I mean, so he got ousted basically from the WWE. He's had all these sexual lawsuits and whatnot, and now all the people that
have to research.
It could be good. I mean, I'm a big wrestling fan, so that would be a great one to get in there. He's a very polarizing individual, but very successful. Built that thing into an empire. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Let's hit us up with some comments. Make sure you like and subscribe and follow us on social media, and we'll keep the good content flowing your way. Our man Zeus over here with his beautiful studio. It's a pleasure to come over here and utilize these facilities. Thank you, Zeus. K-Train, keep it rocking, man.
Snails, always love it.
Have a great week. For the one and only Kato Kaelin, I'm Tom Zenner. Thanks for watching 1 Degree of Scandalous. We will catch you next week. Thanks for watching, everybody. If you enjoyed that episode today with CeCe Moore, man, we've got a lot more for you. Dive into our database. Check out this episode right here. Andy Caldwell of the Las Vegas Police Department, how he tracked down and busted O.J. Simpson in Vegas, and the Hollywood Fixer, Paul Baresi. Go back and watch that episode right here.